Hi, my name's Mark Ellis, and I'm the director and writer and producer of Birth of a Spa Town and Leamington's Victorian Legacy. I've put together, in the absence of a speaker meeting this month, a short video in which I'll answer a few of your questions about the making of the films. But then I'm also going to invite a few friends to join me. So I've got three of the participants in the most recent film, that's Sydney Sison, Mick Jeffs and Martin Green, to come along for a short panel discussion, which we'll get to in a minute. But first of all, I thought I would take this opportunity to answer a few of your questions about the making of the films themselves. So the first question is, what was the inspiration for making these films? And I think in a way it's twofold. One, as a Leamington resident and someone who isn't a history buff, I was always surprised how little I and many of my friends actually know about the town. You know, it's called Leamington Spa, but why is there no spa? Why have we got the buildings that we've got in the town centre? And I think really my overall objective with the films was to try and create some kind of layperson's guide to how Leamington came to be the way that it is, and why some of the things that were important in Leamington history just aren't there anymore. The second aspect to this is that I've been working for quite a number of years with the history group on their website, which I originally, I think, built the version of the website that went live in 2013, and then we recently, last year, redid the website. And one of the things that really struck me was that it's a fantastic website. There's loads of really interesting articles on there, and a number of people from the history group, as you'll know, have published many books. But there's an opportunity to reach out to a broader and different kind of audience with video, which is incredibly popular these days and very engaging. And we wanted to try and use that medium, if you like, to bring the stories of the history group to a broader audience. I'm very much, as a filmmaker and as a documentary maker, inspired by filmmakers like Ken Burns, who's the great American documentary maker. And his films, you may be aware, he's done series on the American Civil War and the Vietnam War, and many others as well. And they tend to fuse archive material, photos and historical footage, along with interviews with experts and contemporary footage of the places as they exist today. And that's very much the kind of look and feel that I was trying to achieve with these films. Okay, so the next subject is, how did we decide what we wanted to cover? And this, of course, is one of the hardest things, almost more than anything, knowing as much what to leave out as what to include. When it came to the most recent film about Leamington's Victorian legacy, one of the things that struck me in discussion with my colleagues at the history group, so I work very closely with Mick Jeffs and Margaret Rushton and Michael Pearson overseeing this production. But Leamington was really, in many respects, a microcosm of the country as a whole during the Victorian period. And that really framed the agenda for this particular film, looking at the kind of political, social, industrial progress that characterised Victoria's reign as a whole and how that manifested itself in Leamington. And then obviously a huge theme within the development of Victorian Britain was this notion of invention and ingenuity. And again, we wanted to try and bring that forward in the film. Also, in terms of trying to make this something that would engage the layperson, I particularly wanted the film to have some sense of drama and engagement to it. So I'm looking, as we're teasing out these stories, always to try and find interesting characters, particularly characters who can bring together multiple themes, multiple strands of the story. And there are many of those in Victorian Leamington. So you might have someone like Sidney Flavel, who was both an industrialist but also a politician, or Samuel Wackrell, who became the town's first mayor, but who was also a shop owner. And so focusing the story around characters that people can start to develop an understanding of, and perhaps to identify with a little bit, is key to telling this story. And we're also looking for drama, and situations where there might be some conflict. So for example, the challenges that Henry Bright found when he was trying to find a source of clean water for the town creates for a more interesting and engaging story. Next question is about how we went about actually making the film, what the process was. And actually it's quite a structured process. So we start off having identified the broad themes of what we're going to look at. We created what we called a content map, which was almost like a mind map of all the different topics and the intersections between those, and identifying key flashpoints and key characters in the story. And that allowed us to then work out, okay, well, if we're going to tell this story, who do we need to interview to have the expertise, to have the research background, to be able to tell that story. So the interviews really form the basis of telling the story. And then quite late in the day, one of the last things I do is actually writing the script. And the script is largely there to tie together the interviews, to fill in the gaps, if you like, and to create a continuity between the main storytellers who, in terms of how we're setting out to try and achieve it anyway, are the historians from the local history group and beyond. And then the final stage, once we've got the story put together and we have, if you like, the soundtrack recorded, is to then find the imagery that we can use to illustrate the story, be those photos or drawings or original illustrations. And it was incredibly helpful to have Mick Jeffs around to be able to fill in the gaps by drawing some of the things we couldn't find images for, particularly in terms of the first film, Birth of a Spartan. In a lot of the early Spartan, there is no documentary evidence, or very little documentary evidence of what these bathhouses were like, particularly on the inside. So we had to use a little bit of creativity to try and bring those things to life through drawings and through animation. In terms of the actual historical archive that we used, a lot of that came from the Art Gallery and Museum, and Hugh Jones in particular was incredibly helpful in providing those images and permission to use those, as well as providing access to go and film some of the artefacts in the museum. But then other things we managed to find from the historical archives. So places like the British Museum, the British Library have some digital resources which it's possible to use on not-for-profit projects like this. And some of the images, particularly some of the tennis images from the most recent film, some of the images of the Renshaw twins were bought in from commercial libraries. So the next question is all about, I suppose, the casting of the film. How did we choose the people and how did we get them involved? And obviously that works on a number of levels. In terms of the interviewees who form the bedrock of the story, that has slightly evolved over time. So when it came to producing the first film, Birth of a Spartan, when people didn't necessarily know quite how things were going to work out, we were very lucky to have a few people who volunteered to participate, including Sydney and Michael and Mick and Jeff Watkin. When it came to the second film, Leamington's Victorian Legacy, we were able to show people something that we'd done already. So I think it gave a broader range of people confidence that they might be able to get involved and it not be either a waste of their time or a difficult or embarrassing experience. And it's a topic that has been documented quite extensively, and we were lucky enough to get some of the people who wrote the books. So Mick and Martin Green had recently published a very successful book about the Iron Men, and as soon as I knew that was a topic that I wanted to cover in the film, then they were the obvious people to involve in terms of interviewees. We were also very lucky to be able to access Janet Storey, who wrote both a book on William de Normanville and also quite a well-known children's book about Sam Lockhart and his elephants. And she was, if you like, an obvious person to talk to about some of those subjects. When it came to the narrators, I was really keen that we have some young people involved in the process. Partly, I think, as to give a contrast to the main participants in terms of interviewees in the film. And I think it's safe to say that we're all kind of middle-aged and above in terms of the people who are sort of core to this enterprise. So I thought it would make a nice contrast to have some younger voices in the piece. But also, I want it to feel like the people's story, it's Leamington's story. So a mix of voices, male and female, younger and older, to actually bring that story to life. Stella Belitho put out a casting call to local schools, and we were able to get actually a great selection of willing sixth formers who were keen to engage with the project and to get the experience of being involved in a piece like this. So for the first film for both of us, Spartown, we had two students from Myton School, Katie and Emma, and then this latest film we had people from three different schools. So we had Will from Warwick School, we had Madeleine who goes to Kenilworth, and Charlotte who goes to Princethorpe, and they were people who responded effectively to our advert and volunteered, came forward, had auditions, and then got the job. And then we mustn't forget our professional voice, Alan Gill, who many of you will be familiar with, who's a local actor who ran the Teatro Theatre School at the Spa Centre for many years and has appeared in programmes like The Crown. And he very generously volunteered some of his time to do our readings. So in the first film, it was Bissett's poetry and extracts from the Leamington Courier. The most recent film, it was Walter Watson's report to the Board of Guardians and the extract about the death of Victoria at the end. And that, again, gave a really nice extra dimension to the story. And the final question, which I think came from Barry, was about one of the technicalities of making the film and particularly the use of aerial footage in the most recent film in Leamington's Victorian legacy. And he asked specifically, do we use a drone? To which the answer is yes. And here it is right here. So it's a teeny tiny little thing, really. This is called a DJI Mavic Mini, and it's about a 300 gram drone. It actually technically classifies as a toy, would you believe this thing? But it has a little HD camera on a gimbal stabilizer on the front, and this is what we used for the overhead shots of the Mill Gardens and the Pump Room Gardens and the Greenway Strip. And yeah, it produces great little pictures. Was it difficult to do? Barry asked. Yeah, it took a little bit of practice. I had a few mishaps along the way practicing in my own garden. In a way, the most challenging thing with something like this is that you need to be really careful about where and when you use it. It's not allowed within 30 metres of any building that you don't own. And you're also obliged to kind of keep it away from people for obvious health and safety reasons. So I actually went out and did that filming very early one Sunday morning. I was pretty much up at break of dawn, and as soon as the light was usable, I was kind of up in the air filming that in various places around town. So it was it was challenging in certain respects, but I think, and I hope you'll agree, that the end product was worth it. And I think certainly in terms of getting a feel for that transformation of Leamington's townscape for which William de Normanville was responsible. It gave an extra dimension to our understanding of that, and also I think hopefully makes Leamington a more interesting and enticing place to visit, which is one of the kind of secondary objectives of making these films. Okay, so I think that answers all the questions in terms of how we set about making the films. But we had a whole bunch of extra questions about what the process or what the participation in that process was like for the historians themselves, and some specific questions around the history. And I'm going to convene with my panel of friends to answer some of those now.
For this panel session, I'm joined, thank you very much for joining me, but we have Martin Green. Good morning, Martin. We've got Sydney Syson.
Hello.
And we've got Mick Jeffs, who's not visible on video, unfortunately, but hopefully we can hear you. You still hearing us loud and clear, Mick?
Yes, hello there.
Great. Okay. So let's start off. We've had a number of questions about the film, some of which I've answered in terms of the technicalities, but some of them were more about the history and about the experience of actually participating in the project. And I thought that the best thing to do would be to gather a panel of people who are actually in the film to talk about this. So maybe if we could start off just by way of introduction, and maybe we start with you, Sydney. Obviously in the film you had specific areas of expertise. So you talked particularly about the development of tennis in Leamington, and then also later about William de Normanville and his contribution to the town. What was it about those specific subjects that really attracted you to those and made you focus your interest and research on those?
My interest is in people and in the stories about particular people and what they did. And the story of tennis was interesting with Harry Jem and Aguro Pereira and the other people, but also because of the Renshaw twins, because they really brought tennis to life as a spectator sport. And it's interesting that they were actually born in Leamington, so that was my interest there. And William de Normanville is just such an inventor and an amazing engineer who came up, as many engineers do, with solutions to problems, and beautified Leamington with that wonderful green corridor that stretches all the way from Mill Gardens, Jefferson Gardens, right the way through to Victoria Park.
Great, thank you. And Martin, if you can hear me, obviously, I mean, you talked about a number of things in the film, but particularly about the development of industry in Leamington and the rise of the Ironworks, the rise of Flavels, and then the big spat between Sidney Flavel Senior and Harrison. How was it that you came to be so interested in that, and obviously to the point where you, along with Mick, wrote the book about it?
Well, I've lived in Leamington for many years and spent some of that time obviously wandering the streets. And what I noticed was that there were a large number of coal hole covers with names of a number of different people upon them. And I thought there must be a story behind this. And for example, the name Carter, there are coal hole covers with Carter of Oxford and Carter of Leamington and Carter of Emscott. And then Harrison of Emscott producing an identical. Looking at these covers, of course, is some amusement amongst my colleagues and friends, but actually it's not the covers themselves in a sense, it's the history that lies behind it, the story that lies behind it. What exactly was happening with the production of all these items in Leamington? And then following from that is the fact that the one name that's missing from those covers is Flavel, because obviously he was concentrating on other things. And Lyndon Cave, Toby Cave, had said to me once, you know, Flavel, he never had a patent. And he didn't tell me any more about it. And I thought, well, I need to follow that up. And that was one ingredient that I like to follow. And then obviously also the decorative ironwork that exists in the town, and some of the public ironwork, the Pump Room Gardens bandstand, for example, which is manufactured not by local firms, but by Scottish cast iron manufacturers, McFarlane of Saracen Foundry in Glasgow, and the Avery Cafe, which was the tea pavilion for the Jefferson Gardens, produced by, again, another Glasgow manufacturer, James Allen of the Elmbank Foundry. So all these things put together, I thought there's a lot about iron in the town. Let's try and find out a bit more. And I gave a talk to the Leamington History Group, and Mick Jeffs came up to me afterwards and said that he was also very interested in the ironwork. And that's where our joint scheme emerged.
Thank you. And Mick, I mean, while we're on the subject of the ironworks, obviously it's an area that you're also interested in. When you were developing your areas of research for the book, did you and Martin focus on different aspects, or did you collaborate and overlap on the subject matter?
We mostly concentrated on particular manufacturers. I'd come in very much on the back of Flavels, because I'd researched Flavels quite deeply and put a web page onto the Leamington History Group website. I was sort of going through the local industries at the time, and I also did a page on AP, Lockheed, and so on. And so our main split was on the names of the manufacturers. I focused on Flavels and 3 or 4 others, and Martin concentrated on 4 or 5 and some very small ones who got just a very small paragraph.
And one of the things, as I understand it, there was a bit of a sort of scoop with the book, was that the received wisdom being that Flavel had kind of founded the Eagle Foundry, which obviously is the most visible side of its presence these days. But you found out that wasn't true. Tell me a bit more about the story behind that.
Well, the story always was, and appears in a book called Rangemaster. I won't mention the author, who's now passed away, but the story was that Flavels founded the Eagle Foundry about 1830, 1833, something like that. But researching back mainly through the Leamington Courier archive, we found out that Carter, Smith and Taylor actually founded it there in 1834, 35. And they were there for quite a while. And then Thomas Ratcliffe took over from them. He was in partnership for a while. And that Flavels did actually move there till something like 1856. And there's a little advert in the Courier which states that he's moving from Augusta Place to the Eagle Foundry. And that's the story, really. He had had various premises in the town before he went to Eagle Foundry. And as I say, he was in Augusta Place, and one of his adverts says he was at the rear of the tennis courts. As you can imagine, the foundry in that area now. But quite a few of the iron men were quite close to the town centre. You know, Carter was up in Foundling Avenue, and somebody else was in St John Street, just off Bedford Street, and so on.
And one of the questions that seems to have kind of come up in relation to the film is the extent to which was Leamington typical of what was happening all around the country during the Victorian age, or was it in some way unique? So, I mean, we'll perhaps broaden it out in a moment, but thinking specifically from the point of view of the development of the ironworks and that kind of industry that was going on. Martin, perhaps you could speak to this one first. Is that typical of what was happening in a lot of English towns at the time, or was Leamington particularly notable for its ironworks?
Well, obviously, the expansion of 19th century towns in Britain places great demands upon a local iron industry. All sorts of things made of iron are used in the expansion of the town, And Leamington's very rapid population growth and urbanisation obviously meant there was quite a market. The thing that marks Leamington as something I think unusual is this focus on Flavel and the Kitchener, and the fact that it was known as the Leamington Kitchener, and Leamington Kitcheners were manufactured all over the country. It carried the name the Leamington Kitchener, and in the great debate between Flavel and Harrison, I noticed I came across a reference in the Maidstone Gazette the other day, which was warning customers, don't buy anything, he didn't mention the name, made by Harrison, you must buy the genuine Leamington Kitchener made by Flavel. So in that respect, I would say that Leamington is unusual, but it's false to imagine that all Leamington Kitcheners are made in the town. It's not true. There are quite a lot made in Birmingham, for example, where a carter who moved from the town produced Leamington Kitcheners. So it's a good story, actually.
And Sydney, I don't know whether when it comes to someone like William de Normanville, who obviously was a hugely important person in terms of shaping the characteristics of the town as we see it today from that role as the kind of borough surveyor and engineer. Does every town have a William de Normanville, or was Leamington particularly blessed in that regard?
I think Leamington was particularly blessed in that regard. And also, he arrived at a time, he still had his battles, yes, but he arrived at a time when a lot of the earlier work that had been done, which in that period of history, we're talking about whether Leamington was typical or in advance of places or in the rear. I mean, Leamington was in the rear when it came to dealing with sewage, for example. It got a rather nasty report from an inspector saying that it was condemned as a town. We had a cholera outbreak in 1849. Did eventually get that sorted out, fortunately, before William de Normanville arrived on the scene. And also, likewise, it had got its water situation sorted out by then. But yes, well, because he was a visionary, and he was a bit of an architect as well as an engineer, a bit of a town planner as well. So Martin was talking about Ironworks, the design of what was then the public swimming pool was a very interesting roofs design, which I believe people still look at today and think, oh, that's sort of modern in a way. So Leamington was extremely fortunate having him, and I wonder why he stayed so long, actually. But Leamington, it had its industry, but it wasn't marked as a big industrial town, I don't think. It was extremely popular for people to retire to. A lot of ex-colonial, ex-military, ex-naval people throughout that century had retired here. Daughters of the Archbishop of Canterbury as well.
And Mick, I mean, obviously another person whose efforts and enterprise is very visible about the town is John Kundle, and you obviously spoke about him in the film. Again, is that the degree to which one particular local architect was able to sort of make his imprint on the skyline of the town, if you like? Is that something, again, that if you went to other towns, there would be the equivalent of John Kundle, or again, was his case special?
I guess I have done no real research on that, but I guess there's often the case that one or two or three local architects sort of catch the eye of the builders and developers in the town. Kundle eventually went on to build the town hall, of course, and that was an interesting event, because there was a competition where 32 people entered designs for the town hall, and strangely the local man John Kundle got the job. So it does make you wonder how these people get into public awareness. Of course, a lot of the building in Leamington I don't think had an architect. A lot of it was built by builders who and developers who use sort of standard plans. In London, they talk about sort of set designs for different size developments and so on. And I think these were probably adapted in Leamington before Kundle, of course, before the Victorian period. There was William Thomas who designed a lot of the buildings, and he was the name that was bandied around all the time until he left and went to Canada. So I guess I've done a lot more research on architects since then, and there's nobody who really stands out. People like the Royal Midland County's Home appointed an architect, the Warnford Hospital appointed an architect, but the rest of their practice seems not to be recorded.
Interesting. Okay, so changing tack now, and just sort of thinking a bit more about the sort of the process of making the film. What was the experience of being interviewed for the film like, and how did you feel about being approached, and what sort of preparation, if any, did you do for your interview? Perhaps we could start with you this time, Sydney, if that's okay.
Well, I was a bit apprehensive, but Mark is a superb interviewer, so there were no problems at all. I quite enjoyed it in the end. As far as research went, well, I did all my reading up. So there's the William D Normanville book, recently republished by the Leamington Society, Seeds of Lawn Tennis, and of course, Linden Cave's History of Royal Leamington Spa. And what I find a fascinating book is The First 100 Years. It's reprints from the Courier. And all of these are available when we get back to the public library in Leamington on the upper floors, or in the history section of the Oxfam bookshop as well.
Great. And Martin, what about you? How was the experience for you?
Well, as you remember, Mark, I was a little bit apprehensive as well. I was flattered to be asked, and I realised that my expertise was on a particular aspect, the industrial heritage, particularly the ironwork, and I was very happy to talk about that. So I did a little bit of preparation, but having just produced our book, which I just happen to have with me, as they say, it was reasonably fresh in my mind, so that the amount of preparation I needed to do was limited. But as Sydney also said, Mark was a very easy man to work with. I felt I was being a bit difficult at times, but he smoothed things through, and we reached a satisfactory conclusion, I hope.
And how did it feel when you actually saw the final version after everything else had sort of hit the cutting room floor? Were you surprised at what you saw?
No, I thought it was a very effective trimming of all the material that we'd gone through, and I, without giving too much away, we had a few repeats, had to do a few necessary repeats of my material, mainly because there was a scaffolder working next door, which was imposing unnecessary sound to the film. No, it was a delight actually to see the film, and I thought it was very successful.
Thank you. And Mick, now obviously this is the second, like Sydney, the second film that you've been involved in. How was the experience for you, and what kind of preparation did you feel that you needed to do to be ready for the interview?
Well, I found it very easy to work with you, Mark, and you made it all very easy. I'm
going to have to edit all these bits out, don't you?
My main problem is deciding which shirt to wear, actually. So I'm not too worried about the history, because we can always stop and look that up. I don't think it's obvious when people seeing the film, but of course you can stop and look it up and go back. And I think the other main problem I had was my tummy rumbling, and I had to redo a couple of pieces for that. But otherwise, I found it quite easy. It was strange, really, because I'd always avoided television work when I was at work. you know, we tried to do publicity, and I used to dodge the camera. I think I've only been on television once for Midlands Today, talking about traffic signs in Woolston, of all things.
And Mick mentioned that he'd had, well, one experience of being on TV. Sydney, Martin, what about you? Have you been on camera at all or a lot before?
I have been on camera before, Mark, in a completely different world. But it was interesting, actually, because I'd been interviewed many times, but I found this actually quite stressful initially, because it was perhaps a new topic area for me, and I didn't want to make any mistakes. And in particular, I wanted to convey my enthusiasm for the industrial heritage, and to emphasize how important it is to keep a record of these activities. Not everybody in Leamington Spa could enjoy some of the finer pleasures that the town had on offer. A lot of people were working in factories, in foundries, in brickworks, and they had a pretty hard life, you know, working in those conditions, and pretty poor housing to go with it. And I felt that was an important ingredient to get into the story of Leamington. There's quite a contrast between rich and poor in the town.
Yeah, and that was definitely one of the things that we were quite keen to try and convey in that it, you know, it was as far as it could be a story of all the people, if you like. Of course, much harder because the you know, the documentation, there's lots of lovely drawings and photos of nice houses and rich people, but that was one of the most challenging aspects in terms of making the film, I think, was trying to sort of document at all, you know, what the conditions in the slums were like, or, you know, because, you know, there's just very little documentary evidence of that, other than things like the Watson report from when they did the audit at the outbreak of cholera. So it was interesting. Just kind of completing the round. Sydney, what about, have you done a lot of on-camera work and TV interviews before?
No, not at all. But I have stood up and talked to an awful lot of people as a university lecturer, and also I was invited to give sessions at conferences. So that's my experience.
Mm-hmm. And really, just a question for anyone now. So obviously, we're very much hoping that we'll make more of these films moving forward, and we're always, you know, keen to get new contributors. If you were going to give any tips to prospective contributors or advice to prospective contributors, what would you say to them?
Well, it was actually something you said, Martin, and that is, if oneself has enthusiasm for something, that is what is most likely to light up your audience and get them interested in whatever you're talking about.
Yeah, I would say don't fear the experience, and don't have too much of a predetermined script. I think Mark was very keen to make it feel more like as a general chat rather than some sort of scripted lecture, and I found that's an easygoing way of dealing with this sort of subject. And again, don't be frightened to have a go.
Mick, have you got anything to add?
No, I haven't really got anything to add. The idea of a script, I wrote a lot of things down, but I managed not to use the script at all when I was speaking. You know, it gets in your brain, and I've never been good at learning lines, sort of thing. But the particular subject I must have been so interested in that it was quite easy to recall. So it was quite an enjoyable experience.
Great. Okay, well, just before we wrap up, just a couple of questions on sort of historical detail, which were submitted via Margaret. So I'll throw these open to you, and you may or may not have answers to these. The first one was about the Theatre Royal, which obviously we mention as being the site of some of the performances of the Elephants, and I think it was Ian McCutcheon who asked, when did it stop being the Theatre Royal and reopen as a cinema?
Well, if I can butt in, sorry, Sydney, are you ready to speak?
No, I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, well, I've done
I do know the answer.
Well, a similar question occurred on a Facebook page the other day, and I said that it was turned into a cinema in 1933 because that's what Lyndon Cave said in his book. But I've now trawled the Leamington Courier online, and it was in fact opened as a cinema at the end of June in 1935.
That was the date I had, and the Regent Theatre closed in the year before, 1934.
Yes, the planning permission was in May 1935. Yeah.
And the site of that now is where is that where the car park is for Regent Court? Is that right?
Approximately, yes.
Yes, it's about there. It's very strange when it closed as a cinema. It became a workshop for Regent Garage, which was behind the Regent Hotel. So if you look through the window, you could see cars being worked on in what used to be the cinema. But interestingly, it did reopen as the Regent Cinema. I would always had the feeling it had another name before it became the Regent Cinema. But the Courier confirmed it was the Regent Cinema from that time.
And I believe it had a fantastic Compton organ as well.
I think you're right. Wasn't that moved somewhere? Doesn't it still exist? I haven't got the facts to hand, but
I don't know. I would hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my dad was actually a cinema organist. So yeah, I know the world of Compton organs very well. Anyway, that's another story altogether. And then just the final thing really on the history. Again, this is the question I think that came in via Ian and asking about, if you look at the parade today, you know, which buildings there are still the original ones that would have been there during the Victorian period, not just the frontages, but the buildings as a whole. And I suspect this could be a very long topic. So if we could just sort of anyone who's got any thoughts on this, just briefly focus on perhaps the most notable buildings that are still there, that are, you know, if someone wanted to kind of view a slice of what the Victorian period was like, which ones would you point them towards?
The obvious ones are the Regent Hotel, the Town Hall, and I would suggest the Clarendon Hotel at the top. Well, what was the Clarendon Hotel at the top of parade? But it's an interesting question because, as many of us will remember, when Laura Ashley was being built, they propped up the facades, but altered all the stuff at the back, and the facades fell down. So those were all rebuilt, and obviously Boots was rebuilt, and yeah, many of them have gone. But isn't it lovely that overall you still get a Regency flavour to the parade?
Especially in social distancing.
Funnily enough, one of the buildings that I am fascinated by isn't an original Victorian one, but it's Burton's opposite the town hall. And I'm interested in that because when it was built, you classically had the tailors at the bottom, you had a snooker hall and a dance studio above. And the theory was that you needed a proper suit for playing snooker and for doing your ballroom dancing. And that was why traditionally around the country, you found these things there. And in Leamington, the Taylors has gone and is now Bill's, but you still have the dance studio and the snooker hall.
Yeah, terrific. And anything to add on that, Mick?
I've done a lot of work on the run of buildings from Regent Street down to opposite the town hall, which was the original block that was built. I think it's 23 houses. I seem to get a different answer every time. But of course, they were houses. They weren't built as shops. So they've all been massively changed to turn them into shops. And then, of course, the facades have changed. there's two banks. One that used to be Barclays is now Bar and Block, and the one that was the Midland and is now HSBC. There's the black and white pub, which used to be known as the Haunch of Venison, is now, I think, is called the House. There's the building further up that used to be Nationwide, that has a sort of mid 20th century facade on it. And then, of course, the one on the corner, which we all know as Woodward's, that isn't the original building because it was the site of the Upper Assembly Hall, which had a doorway leading onto the parade. And the house opposite that, on the other corner of Regent Street and the parade, that was the first house to be built on the parade in 1808. But as far as the inside is concerned, the best place to find information about that is on the English Heritage site, the listed buildings of England. And I've made a note that they were listed. They're not, that block I'm talking about, not all of them are listed, but the first ones to be listed were numbers 148, 148A for some reason, which were listed in 1953. And then others were listed in 1980, and then others in 1999. So I'm not quite sure why that is. I guess 148 and 148A are very original, but I haven't been able to check that.
Terrific. Okay. I mean, if anyone, it sounds like you've got lots of kind of interesting information there. If anyone wants to delve into that in a bit more detail, would it be okay for them to contact you, Mick?
Yes, of course.
Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for agreeing to take part in this. You shed a lot more light on this particular subject than I possibly could have done